Welcome to the Recovering Perfectionist Podcast, where I empower you to develop sustainable habits, challenge society, and take messy action. I'm Christine, life balance coach and world champion ballroom dancer, and I believe that everyone has the power to create their very own life by design. The Recovering Perfectionist Podcast was created with a mission to encourage a life of abundance by finding peace and acceptance in our own imperfections and developing healthy self-love through sustainable habits and manifestation. It's time to align with the universe for the full human experience and redefine what it really means to be successful.
It's too good, the secret is out and wow.
Welcome back. We are season 6. It is the Recovering Perfectionist Podcast. And I am here with a long time waiting guest, mostly on my part. I'm here with Julie. Guys, this is going to be an episode you do not want to miss. She is a psychedelic facilitator. What does that mean? Just wait. Enter Julie. Hi, Julie.
Hi. Oh my goodness. I'm so excited to be here with you and to have this conversation.
This is so great. Let me explain a little bit. So as people know, this is a Recovering Perfectionist podcast. So I am really trying to work in that not put pressure on myself situations. So I was gearing up for season 6, ready to go, coming back from Europe for 2 months, excited. And then I got to a point where I was like, it's just not vibing. I'm not feeling it. It's a lot of work. And it wasn't even the work. It's like, I felt like the conversations weren't going to be as powerful. So Julie and I had connected, wanted her to be our guest, and she was so patient. And I was like, you got to just hang out with me for a second, because it's got to feel right. And here we are. It feels right. Julie, I am so excited to have you here. This is a long time coming, but I want to know, first of all, I need you to explain to me, because we're going to come back to your history and how you got into this, but can you just tell me real quick what a psychedelic facilitator is?
Yes, of course. A psychedelic facilitator is someone who's trained to hold space and guide people who are under the influence of psychedelics, whether that be at the micro, the macro level. And, psychedelics include psilocybin, LSD, ayahuasca, and people are trained in particular strains of plant medicine. So not everyone, like for instance, I don't facilitate with ayahuasca. I facilitate primarily with psilocybin, and I'm branching out into other things. So it is a broad term that can refer to specific things. But when you were speaking about coming back and not feeling like it was the right time, I think the greatest thing the plant medicine has given me is this feeling of surrender. So when you said, hey, actually now isn't a good time, there was not 1 ounce of me that didn't feel like, of course it's not. Like when it is, it will happen. And I think that's a really powerful gift everyone can receive, because so many of us think that we know better. We want things to happen on our timeline.
Surrender. Julie, I have a feeling surrender is going to be the word of the episode here. This is something I am still struggling with to this day. It's whether it be perfectionism or, need to control or fear of the unknown, or however anyone wants to put it. I think we have so much, especially high achievers, have so much trouble understanding how to surrender. And this concept of plant medicine has become so much, first of all, it's starting to be legalized in so many different places, which is making obviously national and world news. And we are trying to understand what that means and what it can do for us. And, we have coaches and facilitators like yourself popping up to be able to help us understand. And there's so much science behind it, which we'll get into, about how it's helping with, dementia and brain and all these different, tap into the parts of ourselves that we don't even use half the time, like that's really what it's about. So Julie, let's start with, first of all, a little bit of background about you and how you got into this.
That is a not very straightforward story.
It never is, Julie. It never is.
I truly feel like I've always been a perfectionist. My dad passed away when I was little, and I felt like he was my source of really unconditional love and connection. And I can see now that my mom has always loved me and will always love me no matter what, but her love felt more tied to performance. So I always strove to be top of my class, like from kindergarten to law school. And I went to law school. Yes, I used to be a lawyer because I decided I didn't want to be a doctor, something that I kind of said I wanted to be for so long because I realized blood was something I could not overcome fear-wise. And there wasn't really a space for me to consider what do I actually want. He basically was like, figure it out. And so in my perfectionist mode, I sat down with lists of what am I good at? What do I like? What don't I like? What aren't my strengths? And landed on lawyer. And so I went and I even practiced for 3 years and I'm so happy I went. I just had this discussion with a fellow facilitator of plant medicine because it really changes the way you think in a way that I think no other uh experience in life will. Like the law is just so different.
So
Ultimately, though, it
you
wasn't.
passed the bar and everything?
Yes. Yep. I'm
Wow.
actually continue to be barred in several states in the Midwest and in California.
Very cool.
Um, but it just, oh, there's so much about the law. Even just saying I used to be a lawyer that feels like gross to me, if that makes sense. It's like
Yeah.
it's not. I don't feel like the law is effectuating justice, and it's such a hustle culture, and it's um
Well, let's also
rewarding burnout.
clarify. Yeah, let's also clarify that I think mostly in this country, because there are places I think where
Yes.
government laws, things like that, are really a cohesive addition to a community to help grow. And with our country being as massive as it is, when you have all these districts and mayors and governors, and there's just too many chefs in the kitchen, that then when you bring the lawyers in and all this stuff, it's like, and everyone's trying to sue everybody. I think that there's just a huge just blur around the law in general in this country, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I'm always speaking just from my own experience. I've only
Sure.
ever been a lawyer here.
Right.
Um, and I've that's actually such an interesting conversation I've had with a lot of people of thinking like, I think the US's problem is just that we're too big and we're trying to represent so many diverse interests that we just
That's it.
can't.
Yeah. Yeah, and the freedom, and everybody wants what they want, and it's very hard. I was just watching a documentary last night that just came out called the Blue Zones, The Secret of the Blue Zones, which is where people live the longest, like centenarians. And they talked a lot about Singapore and how they decided to try to create a blue zone there, and that took, again, like widening sidewalks so people could walk on them more, community activities, less car usage, more food, nutritional value in the stores, things like that. This comes from a higher place. It's not something that one person's going to be able to change, and their government is very you know ready to make those changes happen and working towards that every single day. Again, their entire island is 30 miles long. A little bit easier when you don't have the population that we have, and everybody is, and when they implement something, they believe that it is for the greater good of the government. The government has their best interests at heart. Everybody follows the rule. It works peacefully, right? But everyone here has, I want this, I want this, I want this. We're always, agree to disagree situation, and it gets complicated, so, but that's not what we're here to talk about. But so you're not a lawyer anymore.
No, yeah, no, I'm not. I thought that the area of law that I was practicing was the issue. And so right before the pandemic, I was in talks with a firm to move out to the West Coast. I was in Chicago at the time, and to create a West Coast office for this East Coast special education firm. My brother is on the spectrum, and I've worked with kids with disabilities for a long time. And I thought, okay, this is going to be something that lights me up. Long story short, I took the bar in February of 2020. The world shut down like 2 weeks later. And then the firm never, to my knowledge, still has never moved to the West Coast because, it's a lot happened. So I was I'm a newly barred lawyer. I did pass the bar. I swore in over Zoom. I think we were the first people ever to do that, as like a class or whatever. And I just felt it felt like the universe literally could not have slapped me one more time across the face and been like, what are you doing? Like, you're not a lawyer. We're not doing this.
Mm-hmm.
So the way we got connected was through Ashley Gordon, and I had been a longtime listener of her podcast. And
Love.
she was launching QCA to become a certified coach in a variety of modalities. And I was like, you know what? I think this is what I want to do. So that's really where the coaching piece started. And from there, it evolved. So like 2 years ago, I got involved with plant medicine, and now here we are.
What about plant medicine attracted you to it?
So early on in my journey, when I was just becoming a coach, I think I was still in my certification process. I sat with ayahuasca, which is such an interesting place to like jump into plant medicine.
Yeah,
I
that
don't,
you just went for it. She said, "I'm gonna go in the deep end. That's what we're gonna do. We're not gonna start in the kiddie pool."
I wouldn't like recommend starting there necessarily,
Right.
but the journey's perfect, whatever your journey is.
Yeah.
And there was just so much like available there that I think our monkey mind, our conscious mind, our waking mind kind of blurs us out from, that is always available to us, but like we override because of society and the way we're raised and other types of things that don't teach us how to tap into our innate intelligences that plant medicine can help elucidate and bring to the surface. And so from that point on, I was very open. I was open to everything and just sort of sitting and with things and trying things. But ultimately, microdosing is what became sort of the cornerstone of my business. And I had a friend who introduced me to a microdosing company that he had invested in and just wanted me to try it and for feedback and how I felt. And so I did it very intentionally, just like I done every other plant medicine. I researched it. I developed, I followed a specific protocol or a schedule. I paired it with the best of my tools in my toolbox from, all the my certifications and things like that. And I realized how much progress I made personally in a 30-day protocol. And just from sharing about it, which this was never my intention, I just shared about it on Instagram openly, and people were so drawn to it. Can you help me do this? Can you teach me how to microdose? I want to learn how to microdose. How do you do this? And here I am.
Here you are. So this is a very controversial topic. I mean, it is and it isn't. You know what I mean? For people like us, we talk about this stuff. This is not a thing. But the whole point for me wanting to not just talk to you on an episode of The Recovering Perfectionist and bring this to a wider audience is for those people who do think this is a controversial topic. Like I want to talk to them, and obviously give knowledge to those who are more interested in learning more about this. But you've got a lot of generations, older generations that don't understand this. We've got cannabis that has become legal in multiple states. That has become, so now I don't even think about it. Like a lot of people are like, oh, it's such a big deal. And now it's not even a thing. But then you also have people who are like, well, you're doing drugs, you're not doing drugs. Like there's a side of the fence, right? But now we've gone into this whole, like, again, it's very medicinal in mental health. Like that's where we're bridging, I think, that gap of like, these aren't bad drugs, these are good drugs. If we're calling it a drug, if we even call it that. But if for people who are still on that word, this is what is helping people overcome all of these mental issues, mental health issues. So talk to me a little bit about exactly what microdosing is. How does it fit or does it not fit into what cannabis, and like how, for someone who has no idea where this even starts, what are my categories here and what am I looking at as to like, what do these things do?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So to reach the person who is really heard this and might have been triggered by the idea of a psychedelic facilitator, first of all, just want to acknowledge that person for continuing to listen and even being open-minded to pursuing this conversation. And truthfully, nomenclature doesn't matter to me. You can call it plant medicine, you can call it a drug. If you want to label it a drug, though, my invitation to you that I don't feel like there's a lot of wiggle room around is that alcohol is also a drug. So let's just start
Caffeine,
there.
sugar, all these things are, yeah, right.
They're all drugs. So there's a
Right.
popular chart that I like to reference because I think it does such a good job of illustrating this. So it talks about substances toxicity, and the toxicity of a substance in this chart refers to its ability to kill you. And it also talks about the way that we classify it in the United States under the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency. So the bottom of the chart, most toxic, is probably unsurprisingly heroin, right? Very high chance of heroin killing you. I think most people would agree that it's bad and it is
Right.
scheduled. It's highly scheduled, right? You can't get it anywhere. Um, so then you look up even, I think it's like 4 bars on the chart, and there's alcohol. It doesn't take a lot of alcohol to kill you, right? You can quite easily overdose on alcohol. And that is a well, not completely, you have to be 21 years old to purchase it in the United States, but it's pretty unscheduled. You can do with it what you please. Aren't a lot of
Right.
regulations about it. But if you go all the way to the top 3 substances that are least likely to kill you, they're least toxic, it would require the most amount of that substance, are LSD, psilocybin, and cannabis. And those are also substances, until recently, cannabis were Schedule 1 substances. And so there's been a lot of propaganda, false information spread by the government, especially like in the 80s, and a lot of misinformation about how dangerous these substances are. Now, I'm not saying that I'm encouraging people to go take them willy-nilly. There's something in the psychedelic space called set and setting, which refers to the environment that you are in when you take a psychedelic substance, and the mindset that you have when you go into it, which is why I'm so pro facilitation, because I'm working with you to cultivate the best mindset possible to allow you to have the best experience possible. But when those things are controlled for research, real research will tell you that the likelihood of a bad trip, or what we call in the psychedelic space an aberration, is almost negligible. So I just want to open that conversation up to have people consider some things, because if you want to call psilocybin a drug, that's fine, but alcohol does a lot more harm in this world than psilocybin ever has. And I'm not here to demonize alcohol. I love a good glass of wine. I'm going to go have a cocktail after this podcast recording with my
All
girlfriend.
everything in moderation, right?
Yeah, everything in moderation. But I also think it's interesting that what you can see on I like to look at things from a functional level in the brain, not necessarily super chemical, but we can get into chemical as well. Alcohol is just numbing, like it's pausing your reaction to something, and it's shutting down your prefrontal cortex. So you're no longer thinking long term about your decision making, but you're responding in the instant to what you want versus having like a sound response, right? You're in very much reaction mode. So when you have a bad day and you have a drink, and then maybe you yell at your partner, you're not doing anything to fix the situation. In fact, you're creating more of a distress, right? That eventually needs to be handled, versus psychedelics are encouraging you to look at the source of what is actually upsetting me. How can I move through it and work past it? Is bringing the surface to the feeling so that you can actually feel it to heal it. And again, I'm not here to convince you either way, right or wrong, good or bad. But what I love, also go back to your question, microdosing is taking a very small amount of a psychedelic substance. It's sub-perceptual. So um, the person who came up with this concept of microdosing, Dr. James Fadiman, has always said that microdosing is about transformation without intoxication. So if you take a small enough amount, you can get the positive effects in your brain without getting high or going on a trip. And that's why microdosing is so beautiful and can lead to such amazing mental health benefits, because you can do the rewiring without feeling like you're out of control.
Incredible. So we had a conversation right before this, right? You mentioned that you microdosed before this episode. I love it. I was
Here
like,
I am.
great, we're going to talk about it in real time. So explain to me, why you did that, because I'm sure that you have specific times and days and reasons why and when you do it. And how is that benefiting you versus not taking it before this podcast?
Yeah. So one thing that I have so much respect and regard for Dr. Fadiman, who created microdosing. One thing we would disagree on, though, is he would say a microdose is anywhere from 0.1 grams to 0.5 grams of a substance. And to me, 0.5 grams is on the quite high end of a spectrum, because you begin to like feel that you're on something, which to me is not the point of microdosing. Microdosing is not feeling it, but getting the benefit. So the amount that I just microdosed with is 0.2. I'm also trained and have been in this practice and this work for quite some time. I'm currently on a intentional and intuitive protocol or schedule. So intuitive microdosing calls for you to take a microdosing capsule when you feel called, when you feel like there's a higher purpose for it, and to have at least one off day in between an on day. So I haven't microdosed for several days. It was totally within like my purview of like the green zone for microdosing. And I did it before this podcast with the intention to be of service, to be inspired from the medicine, and to connect with you in this conversation so that we could put forth information and a conversation that was going to serve your audience ultimately. And I did it also as a way to illustrate, like, I am so coherent. I'm in my thoughts. I am not out of control. And I'm having an intelligent conversation while supposedly on drugs.
Right. So it's a way for you to kind of open up the creative, vessels of your brain, stay focused. What would you say to people who would say, well, that just sounds like, you got sativa and indica, you take a gummy or something like that. Some people want it to be more focused. Some people just want to relax. How does that differ from what you're doing with microdosing?
So it's very interesting that cannabis does have those two very, very clear strains and like different intentions. What's beautiful about microdosing is very seasoned psychedelic users, psilocybin users do perceive a difference between strains, right? So there's Jack Frost, a very common one that I'm sure a lot of people have heard is called penis envy because it's just kind of a crazy term, right?
Love it.
And they do sort of different things, but for your average microdose user, there isn't so much difference between the strains that's like perceptible to you as a user. But what's beautiful about microdosing and what people seem to forget is that mushrooms are sentient things on this earth. A mushroom is the largest living thing on this earth. It's up in like Washington, and it's 2 miles, I think, in circumference or diameter. And we're connected to something that is also a living part of this ecosystem. And just looking at mushrooms themselves, I would totally recommend going to watch Fantastic Fungi on Netflix, learning about the mycelium and how they connect underneath and they communicate with each other like trees do. When you tap into microdosing and you set your intention, you're asking this like fellow living thing to guide you in some way. So whether my intention for a day is to have more fun or to sit with myself in a difficult moment and process sadness, I'm always being led and guided by the medicine itself. So the strain isn't as important in the microdosing process as it is like if you were to use cannabis, because obviously if you want to have more of a body relaxing high, but you smoke a sativa, you're going to have a very different experience than what you wanted. And that's not
Right.
really the case in psilocybin.
Right, because I absolutely, because I'll take a gummy or something, and it's like we're wanting to relax after a hard day, or we're just wanting to. Honestly, for me, the first couple of times I ever took, because I haven't done any of this. Like I grew up, I went through all of my 20s. I don't drink alcohol. I don't smoke. I don't do anything. So for me, it was like I dance, I exercise, I do all the, like I have ways to release energy. And I was never interested in any of those other things. So I didn't feel like I needed, like you were talking about alcohol, like a way to get over a hard day. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it wasn't even after a hard day. It was more along the lines of like, you get to a point as a perfectionist where you just, or an overachiever, where you're doing so much that even when you're off, you're still kind of on,
Mm-hmm.
And your brain, and my fellow perfectionists out there, we're all speaking this language because we're just, if it's not, if the work day or the client calls are done, now you're like, oh, I got to respond to that insurance claim, or, oh, I got to go and get pick up my car. And I got to, like, you're always having to remember something. Right. And that is exhausting. And that is like, how do we turn that off? Because when you work in that speed all the time, those become your normal habits. And so then one of my friends was like, you should really just try a gummy. Like and I was like, I don't know. Like, obviously I was very hesitant at first, because I was like, I'm not trying to like shut off completely. And I'm not saying that I hate my life and I'm trying to, remove myself from the equation. It's not even that. Or blow off steam, as some people say. It's more just, I need my brain to actually understand that this is the period of time where I'm allowed to relax. And I think as high achievers, we don't often give ourselves permission to just enjoy the moment and not have to put out a fire somewhere, And so by doing that, that allowed me, obviously I have friends that they told me about all the strains and they're like, oh yeah, no, this one tells you to focus. And I was like, I don't need more to focus. I am that. I am a living, breathing strain of that. I was like, I need something to help me relax. So the first couple of times I did it, obviously it was really nice. And it was just kind of like, letting it go. And then into the like third time, I did end up taking a little bit more because eventually your brain starts to like get comfortable with that. Right. And I was like, okay, well, this isn't going to be that big of a deal. And whole trip of like a huge fear that I've had that my brain was not allowing me to process. And actually most of my audience knows one of my biggest fears is pregnancy. So that's what the entire trip was about, essentially. And so what it did is it allowed my brain to get rid of you have to pick up your car, you have to cook dinner, you got to do this, call back this person, da da da. And it was like, what's in the back that you're ignoring? And let's focus on that for a second. And it's scary. And in your normal brain, you're like, I don't want to do that. That's just not, I don't have time for that. And it's uncomfortable and it's overwhelming. I don't even know where to start. And what it did is it just kind of showed me that, like, I was writing things on my phone. I don't even remember writing that I read later. And I was like, what is going on? But it was so cool because it didn't feel out of control. And I think that's what I want to bring. The moral of the story here is that it did not feel like I was completely gone. It felt like for most of the time I was sitting down and just taking it in. And so it felt like I was processing trauma or something I was ignoring because I didn't want to deal with it. And that was just cannabis. So I can only imagine then I have friends, and now you who do, psychedelic facilitation and microdosing and all these different things with all of these incredible plant medicines that are actually built for that. Because cannabis is not advertised that way. It's not meant to have a transformation. It's meant to just help you relax or focus, right? That's kind of how am I wrong? I mean, again, I'm not.
So, no, I think you're exactly right when you say that's not how cannabis is packaged and delivered to us. However, okay, so I find Joe Rogan very like hit or miss. Sometimes I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And sometimes I'm like, what a kook. Sorry, Joe, if you're listening to this. But anyway.
Hey, Joe, if you're listening to this, I want to talk to you.
Me too, actually. I'm on your show. But he said something that I agreed with 1,000% because at the end of the day, all plants to me are medicine. Like nature is our greatest teacher. And people think that people are afraid of marijuana because it can make you paranoid. But actually, what marijuana does is bring our anxieties to the surface so that we do process them. That paranoia is our deepest fears. And so my audience will know that I love to take an edible and go to yin yoga. It's just like to me an hour of like intense meditation. Wow. And so sometimes my yin is a very profound, like happy of I'm praying for people that I know and I'm just giving so much gratitude and I have so much joy for my life and how it looks now. And sometimes my yin is a deep like reckoning of whatever is going on underneath the surface. So I think we're told that marijuana is just like it's a head high or it's a body high and it's just like fun. And obviously there are you're more likely to have an experience, in my experience and understanding, I'm obviously not a cannabis expert, of like a creative sort of breakthrough with a sativa, and maybe you're more likely to relax your body enough to settle into a trauma and that processing with an indica. But that doesn't mean there's not always the opportunity there for transformation if you meet it. And I think what I'm also hearing from you, just because of your like sobriety from other substances, is like you are opening the door to have that experience versus many people who use marijuana, again, no right or wrong, no good or bad, but are like mixing it with other things and they're just doing it to numb out instead of being a very intentional, mindful person.
Exactly. It's more of an intention to numb. And that is not, I don't like the feeling of numb. That's the reason I didn't drink in the first place. That's the reason, I don't do a lot. I want to be able to feel. And as a coach, we always talk about feeling your feelings, right? Because the minute you numb it, people are like, oh, you have a headache, take an Advil. It's like, yeah, but why do I have the headache in the first place? Like, clearly it's a water, food, or sleep thing. Let's fix those. And if it's not, then we got some serious issues. But if I just keep taking Advils, not only is that bad for my body and my gut, but also I'm not solving the root issue. I'm just band-aiding, I don't know if that's a word, but putting a band-aid on the symptoms because I don't want to feel it. And I think also in America, that's what we're accustomed to. I don't want to feel it. What's a quick fix? And what we're talking about here, just for those who are trying to like, what's the point of this, is like, this is not a quick fix. This is why we do therapy. This is why, I want to go back to that phrase you said, paranoia is unprocessed anxiety. Like, whoa, like, can you imagine if fear and paranoia and these feelings that we have, these feelings of feeling unsafe in our own body, we could actually do something about them and process them and package them and move on. I think a lot of people, it's like chronic physical pain. They feel like this is just how it is and I have to live with it. I grew up with trauma, or I had, things happen to me in my life and I went through some dark times, and now that's just a part of me. That's the scars I carry. And it's like, sure, that you can say it in a way that it is what has made you stronger and what has made you, but there are negative side effects of those things that you do not have to, that no longer serve you. You do not have to keep on you, both emotionally and physically. And part of that is therapy, but another part of that we're discovering is plant medicine to help you process this trauma, anxieties, overwhelming feelings, right?
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. I ended a relationship with someone who I had so much love for, like in other ways, the way we got along and connected and just related was beautiful, but he had a really hard upbringing, and his whole sentiment at the end of a tough conversation was, I am who I am. And I was like, that was just so diametrically opposed to how I view life. And what I think is so beautiful about plant medicine is you can set the intention to be whatever you want. And because we're using plants, we're using other living things, they're responding to us, and we can craft our like adventure in any way. Like we can use it to process, he had faced abuse. And neglect and abandonment. Like he could have used it in all of these ways, but he was very set in his like, I am this person, and you can either take it or leave it. And it's like, well, then I'm going to lovingly leave it.
Lovingly leave it, right? I mean, it's easier I don't think it's easier. I don't think you think it's easier either, but I think most people think it's easier to just do nothing about it and live with the trauma. But because going through the journey of it, the process of healing, you don't really know what you're going to find. Sometimes you think you do, but then you kind of go deeper into it and you're like, wow, it's actually not about this. It's about this, or whatever, what have you. And that we go through that in coaching, in therapy, and then now with plant medicine. And so it is scary. It's terrifying. And it is not a quick fix at all.
No, not at all. That's why, if people are going to work with me, like at least 3 months, ideally 6 months in my microdosing collective container. And I think, for those people who are a little afraid to jump in the journey, there's a great book out there that has something to do with plant medicine, but it's called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. And I think in a lot of ways, people resist healing because they're afraid of what their success could look like. They don't trust it. It feels unsteady. And it feels like, what if I do this work and I'm still not better? Or what if I do this work and people don't love me anymore? Like it's their excuse to keep themselves stuck because they're afraid of what true success, abundance, and love could look like.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree. So let's go into more of what this feels like when you are microdosing. What does it look like, and the benefits, and how we can do this? Because this is something I have not done ever. Full transparency. I have only done cannabis, and not even smoking it, just gummies. Just I can count on two hands how many times in my life I've done it, but it was intentional. And I think that's the biggest thing that we're coming to here, Julie, is that what is your intention behind doing this? And that is why I think the conversation is changing around these, I don't want to call them drugs, like around these, what do you call them?
Oh, substances.
Substances. There we go. because that is exactly what it needs to be. Is the conversation needs to change based on what is the intention going into it. What are you trying to get out of this?
Yes. I mean, you are speaking my favorite. If anyone is in my community, you'll know my two favorite words are intention and integration. That's what I'm all about.
Mine's intention and awareness.
Look at us.
I love it. I love it.
But to come back to that theme of surrenders, I wanted to talk about what you were talking about with meditation, and well, sinking into it and just feeling comfortable in your body, and like you could shut down, and not shut down, that's the wrong phrase, but that you could sort of turn off those things that you knew weren't important in the moment to kind of be present and just find calm after a hectic day. And I knew that it would come back around, so I didn't force it into the conversation then, but here we are. I surrendered to it.
I love it.
What's so, again, because they're living, plants are living things, fungi are living things. They're responding to us and they're always giving us exactly what we need. So I have several people that when you spoke to that feeling like you just wanted to calm down, that came up for me a bit, because so many people have told me one of the biggest things they got from microdosing was a feeling of calm in their body. So they were just able to more easily drop into meditation, into presence, to shut off I call it feedback in your mind. Like, oh, I gotta, like you said, call the insurance adjuster and pick up my car and shalala. But everybody is different. So for me personally, what I experience from plant medicine usually is a bit more energy and feeling like I'm very cleanly focused versus coffee, which could be sort of a jittery focus or anything else. And I feel so much more like connected and inspired in the world around me. But it's so different depending too on what is my intention that day, and what is my body crave and need, because I've heard sort of every different, especially new people to this practice who have never sort of done the whatever we call it, the work before. It can be a really emotional process and bring a lot of things to the surface, because before you can dig into whatever else is there for you, like we kind of got to trudge through the mud and clean up the mud, and then we can explore the other things.
Totally. I want to go back a little bit, because now you're talking about the work and everything, that word of feeling connected, connection, right? Or feeling connected to yourself. I think that's something just like when we say you got to do the work and people are like, what's the work? Like no one ever really, I mean, now you're starting to get people that are explaining it, but for a while it was like just this thing that if you know, you know. And I think that, and I think that's the thing that with coaches, especially, that we're trying to kind of break the stigma of like, we shouldn't have this secret language around what we're trying to say, especially if we're trying to educate people. That's our whole goal, is we're educating people. So we should be teaching people what terminology we're going to use and what that terminology means and how you can use it in your healing. And the word connection, or to connect, I come from the world of ballroom dancing, and as dancers, we are hyper connected, not just with each other, but with ourselves. And we understand our point of connection, our balance in our body, flexibility, how we work with another person, action, reaction, resistance. There's just so much to it. And you understand your body when you need something. What are you feeling? Right. So same thing, when you're in this moment, the intention is you're not trying to numb yourself. And I think that's that word of numb is, I don't want to feel anything, good, bad, or ugly. It doesn't even matter. I just want to be, right? And so that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about, and even when I was wanting to take it just to stop the noise in my head, I wasn't trying to numb. I wanted to just be present. Like you said, it's great to do it right before meditating, because when I would try to meditate, again, all the noise, I would try to shut it down, and then I would get mad at myself. And it's like the movie Inside Out, all these emotions are yelling at each other in there. And I'm like, can y'all just keep quiet for a second? I'm trying to do some work here. And so when you're trying to shut down, that's why people have so much trouble meditating. But this word of connection and feeling connected to yourself is this, again, that's why I love the word awareness, is creating awareness around the situation that you're in. And I think in regular conversation, we tend to use the verbiage of like, I just feel off, right? Or or wow, I just feel so great today. Or I don't know. There's just, again, it's kind of like that Brene Brown. There's all these words for it and nobody has taught us these words. And so as coaches, we start to use these connection and work and, things like this, these words that we're using. And that feeling off is you're not connected to yourself. And that's what that really is. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Or do you have something you want to add?
Yeah. Is it okay if I get a little sciencey for a second?
Please.
So I again approach this work from a physiological standpoint versus a chemical one, because I think we sort of belabor like serotonin, especially in mental health. And there's not really a lot of evidence out there, and a lot of new research is coming out to dispute this whole like serotonin is the thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, so everyone has a series of interconnected structures in their brain that science is more popular referring to as the default mode network. So we have like parts of your prefrontal cortex, your posterior cingulate, and different structures. And so when we are on an fMRI, which is monitoring the amount of blood flow in our brain, whenever your mind is wandering, so you're daydreaming, you're ruminating over a past situation, what you would have said, you're worrying about the future and thinking about worst case scenarios, you're playing victim, telling yourself a story, these areas, your default mode network, your DMN, are flashing. Like there's so much blood flow, blood flow, blood flow. So what a very popular research study out of Harvard tells us is that presence equals happiness. Happiness isn't your car. It isn't your partner. It isn't the amount of money you make. It's just how often are you engaged in the moment before you versus being somewhere else. And so what the default mode network research has shown us is that people spend 48% of their day in the default mode network, aka not being present. They're somewhere else in their mind. So half of your day, because you're not present, we're going to go follow a math formula there. It means you're not happy. You're not present. You're not happy. You're somewhere else in your head. But what psychedelics do is it quiets the default mode network. fMRIs show us that blood flow stops going to those areas. So it forces you into the moment to just engage with what is. And Eckhart Tolle in A New Earth will tell you, and I found this so powerful when I first read it, and I've read it a million times now, that it's never the thing that makes you unhappy, right? It's never the emotion itself or the event, but it's the story you're telling yourself. You're telling yourself an unhappy story around the feeling of isolation or frustration or anger or anything else. And when we stop telling ourselves a story and we just engage with a feeling for whatever it is, feel it fully, experience it fully, whether it's grief, whether it's abandonment, if you can feel something in 90 seconds, it will pass. But what happens is, and your average brain, right? Just the way it's programmed right now is we feel a little bit and then we pull away, we avoid. We feel a little bit and we pull away and avoid. But if we were to sink into full, coming back to your word, awareness with it, it would pass and we would be left with something that doesn't feel so distressing.
Well, leaning into it, essentially. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so powerful. That is absolutely incredible. I was going to say something about, and now I just lost my train of thought because I got so wrapped up in being present in what you were saying, which I guess is kind of the whole point. No, you were talking about, so what I tend to say about, the story around the problem, or like you said, it's not the thing, it's the story around it. It's the value that you're putting on something. And so I had a coach tell me at one point that everything is inherently neutral. Mm-hmm. Everything around you, right? A bottle of water, your spouse, everything that is around you, all the energy that is completely neutral. We decide to put value on it, right? So why all of a sudden this person who once was a stranger to me is now someone I spend 100% of my time with? You know what I mean? Because I decided to put value on that person versus it could have been just another person walking down the street that I don't even know. And a situation, right, is exactly the same thing. Why does a situation, if someone cuts you off in the street, you don't know their story, right? You don't know if they're rushing to a hospital or something's wrong or whatever. There could be a whole story there that you have no idea. And most of the time we don't. And we put value on, well, now that made us mad for the whole rest of the day. And all of us, you know what I'm saying? So again, it's like what you're talking about. It's putting that value on something that should have really just remained neutral, that now has affected other areas of our life. And that's what you're talking about, that blood flow going to the stories we tell ourselves. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I say the same thing in the meditation video in my microdosing collective, and it really can ruffle some people's feathers, but I'm fully subscribed to everything is neutral. And so I say this phrase a lot, and people like really want to fight me on it, but there aren't things that are good or bad or right and wrong. It's the value we ascribe to things, right? There's no
That's it.
universal truth out there that we can all agree on. And if there was, maybe then I would still be a bit hesitant, but I'd be more likely to be like, okay, sure. That's
Right.
that's what this thing means. Meaning it comes from within. It comes from within our own lenses and perceptions. And a philosopher, I can't remember who, said that it would be way trippier to spend the day experiencing the world through someone else's eyes and to take like 50 tabs of acid because our stories and perceptions are so different from one another. And even though you and I seem to speak a very similar language and have a similar outlook, I feel like we would still be very much more overwhelmed just going through life with each other's unique perspectives because they are so different person to person. I think that's
Yeah.
why you can see this country be so divided over events that individuals feel like, how can you not see it my way? I am right. The fact that you can't see it means you're wrong and you're bad. And it's
Right.
so divisive because we're so stuck in this idea of right or wrong. And I just don't see that it serves us in any way.
Well, I think those stories that they're telling themselves obviously is not serving them of what is right or wrong, but it is creating it's a defense mechanism against I don't want to have this conversation, right? Honestly. B, and that's the thing is that as coaches, we want to have every conversation, no matter how controversial it is. Actually, the more controversial, the better, because I very much dislike talking to myself about the same kinds of things over and over. I want to talk to someone who has a difference of opinion so I can learn something, right? If I was just talking to other people like me who knew information just like me, what's the point, right? But I think there is a stigma or a programming around the way that we're raised in this country that has taught people that birds of a feather flock together kind of thing. And so especially in religious areas, and we want to make sure that we keep our belief systems the same and we raise our children this way and again, no, we're not here to judge that. They're to each their own. If that works for you, run with it. But I think that what we're seeing is that's starting to not work or serve so many people when it used to. And people are searching for answers. And when you're searching for answers and no one has them, that's terrifying, but I think the thing that we're trying to share with you here is, put your mind at ease. We do have some answers for you, right? There are some people coming out with answers. And I think that's the thing is you get some people where they're like, okay, well, I'm desperate. I need something. I don't understand what's happening to me. Like, their mind is shifting around things. We've got climate change happening. We've got COVID. We've got, people, political, religion, all the things going on and mental health issues. And people are like, I need something different. This isn't working. And then we offer them, cool, I have this, this, and this. And they're all like, ooh, wait, hang on a minute. Like I got reservations about all the things. And it's like, sure, of course you do, because it's not what you were raised around. It's not what you've seen has been approved by society. It's not what you've seen work. You don't have any proof that it works in anyone that you trust. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But that is terrifying for a lot of people. And then they start to do what you said is tell themselves a story, why this isn't going to work for me, why this doesn't work for other people. And you guys are just off your rocker. Right. And I think that's where it gets very defensive. And then nobody wants to have an open mind and conversation about why don't you just give it a try? Right. There's no peer pressure around it. It's like you asked for solutions. These are natural, ancient solutions. Right? These come, like you talk about, these mushrooms and things like that. All these things are coming from, centuries and centuries of people using this as plant medicine back in the day. And some countries even still use this as their only form of medicine.
Yeah, I mean, these truly are ancient teachers, right? And I think this wouldn't be happening, the psychedelic revolution wouldn't be happening right now if the things that people had been shoving down our throats really worked. And so many people, I couldn't even count on all my fingers and toes or make a conclusive tally for you right now, but have come to me because they say, I don't like the pharmaceuticals I'm on. I feel like a zombie. I know that it's not actually getting to the root cause. It's just helping me band-aid over and numb out. I don't even want to do this in the first place. I've tried everything under the sun, and it just breaks my heart because
Mhm.
we're, for whatever reason, you give something like from a doctor or government approval, and then it's gospel. But if you're to look at something that you could literally find in the forest, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to jump off the roof.
I mean, right, exactly. This thing that was created in a lab that we have no idea what's in it, that we just trust right off the bat because the doctor with the degree said so. And then all of a sudden, something that, back in the day when we were just picking berries off a tree and eating natural things with no pesticides and things on it, all of a sudden that's a no-go. So yeah, that's the thing, is that we need to start again, it goes back to unlearning, rewriting stories and programming and conditioning that we've been raised with. And I think there are some people, I think that obviously there's a group of people, and those people tend to be more in the coaching and health and wellness space, that have just wrapped their arms around these ideas and embrace them because they believe in those things. And they're like, that's what I'm not different. This is what my brain, this is what I've been doing the whole time. And then some people who are interested but are scared. There's a lot of fear around it. So that being said, for someone who is, nervous about trying this, but is very interested and open-minded to do so, what would you say is the best way for them to get started?
I like to remind people that there is absolutely no risk of tripping if you microdose. And I don't like to use this word, but I'm going to say it correctly, because people tell me, oh yeah, I've microdosed before. And then I have a conversation with them and I realize like they haven't measured anything and they've just taken a bite of a mushroom. And then they said they were like seeing things. And I'm like, okay, like let's back up. I'm not invalidating your experience, but to me in my work, that's not really microdosing, because I'm going to come back to this phrase, transformation without intoxication. It's really not about feeling it. It's about receiving the mental benefits. So, if you are worried and you are scared, I just want you to know physiologically, if you microdose using like the regimens that I recommend within my community and collective, there is no risk of tripping. You might feel that slight uptick of energy. You might feel calmer in your body and like it's just easier to meditate. You might be a little bit emotional, but it's something that you can handle if you use the tools that I pair with it, right? So I think I'm so keen on intention and integration, because microdosing isn't a magic bullet, and it does require you to do some of the work. It requires you to go to the gym, to sit with your feelings, to process them, to be mindful of them, to ask yourself questions, and to rewrite the script of the story that you have been telling yourself. And from that process, you are actually going to see true transformation and sustainable, long-term, integrated healing and difference.
Yes. And just so for those of you who caught that, I don't think Julie's advising you to go to the gym and microdose and sit with that. I think she's talking about a mental gym.
Yes.
Of, you want to be bulk, you want to gain weight, you want to lose weight, you want to, have better nutrition, you go to the gym. And this is that mental gym that we're trying to talk about, of doing that work. Anxiety is such a huge, huge thing, and it's getting worse and worse every day, just like climate change. And I think we have a lot of anxiety around climate change and all of these different things and fears that we live around. How do you feel that this not only has helped you with your anxiety, if you had some before, but your clients? Because I think a lot of people would relate to the anxiety level of this. Me specifically, I know that in my 20s, I was living the dream. I had no issues. Everything was great. Anxiety was not a friend of mine. And then all of a sudden things started happening in my life, not in a bad way, but just goals started unfolding and things started happening. And I started doing what you talked about, telling myself stories of, am I smart enough to do this? Am I strong enough to do this? Am I, do I have the right team? Like, what else do I need? How can I be better? Like, and you start to create this anxiety storm that is very, very hard to slow down. So how do you feel like this, not just microdosing, but just the concept around the intention behind what you're doing with microdosing, has helped with anxiety?
I have a friend who I was speaking to about my old anxiety, and she just did not believe me, but I used to be a highly anxious person. Saying it and thinking about it now, I can sense it in my body, but I was a terrible ruminator. And it didn't matter if it was about my boss or my boyfriend at the time or anything. I had what I call apocalyptic thoughts. So it's always worst case scenario, like he's gonna dump me, I'm gonna get fired. And I would come home and I would eat crappy food and I would watch Netflix and I would try to avoid. I would just numb out and my anxiety filled my body, like pulsated, and it was so overwhelming. And now, okay, occasionally I'll experience anxiety, but I am not an anxious person. And
Yeah.
coming back to that conversation we had about like the DMN, when you shut down, when you literally force and cut off the blood flow to that area of your brain that tells you all those crappy things and makes you feel those things, it's a lot easier to look at it creates space between you and your anxiety. And so I was just talking about this on my stories yesterday, but when you're really anxious, it cuts you off from processing anything else because you're so stuck in a feedback loop of intense physical sensation and a racing mind. So if you're really anxious all the time, you're never going to get to deeper layers of sadness, frustration, anger, hurt, shame, guilt. You're never getting deeper because you're stuck at this one place. And so if you can turn off the anxiety, then you can start to actually dig into those layers and do some things around them. And like when you clean up the ground, right, like underneath, you realize when you're not microdosing, the anxiety isn't as heightened because the anxiety is really just a response to these other things. But unfortunately, when your anxiety is at a 10, it's preventing you from dealing with the deeper things. So when you can quiet it for a little bit, right, not to bypass it, because what it's allowing you to do is get to the root cause and really
Right.
heal it, feel it, all that good stuff. Then as a byproduct of that work, in the mental gym, your anxiety starts to become less. And I mean, so many people have come to, I would say that's my number one thing. People come to me, I'm anxious. Can you help me? Yes, cool. Let's work together. And the transformation is outstanding. I recently had someone tell me, like, I like to do outtake calls. And she was like, we've worked together for over a year now, but before we started working together, she shared that she had very seriously considered no longer being on this planet. She rated herself at a 0 and she was like, now I'm a 7 and I feel good and I like it. And like that
A
big of a jump is very
7.
common.
That's a huge leap.
I would say my average, actually it's on my list tomorrow to run the numbers between all of my intake, like, where were you before, where are you now? But I would say
Yes.
people at least change 4 marks, 4 numbers.
Wow, that's huge. That's huge. And that doesn't just go to, the substance you're using to facilitate that, but just you as a facilitator to, because it's all great to have knowledge, but if you don't know how to read it and apply it, and that's why we have coaches, is because, you can get analytics on a Facebook ad, or you can get feedback after, a nutrition test, or after microdosing, and if you don't understand what you're looking at and how to apply it to optimize for better results next time, it's going to be hard to improve on what it is that we want based on the goal. So that is why you are so crucial in this process for people. That is incredible results. Very, very cool.
Thank you. I really received that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us, Julie, how we can work with you, where we can find the best place to find you. And obviously, for those listening, all of Julie's links, Instagram. I'm just taking notes here. The book that she recommended, The Big Leap, the Netflix show, all of those links we will put in the show notes. So if anyone was like, oh no, I got to go back and find, no, we got you covered. Don't you fret. No anxiety here. We're going to put everything in the show notes. But just for right now, Julie, tell us what is the best way to contact you and what kind of offer you have to be able to work with you.
You are so sweet for doing that for people. Thank you so much.
Of course.
One of the best places to just interact with me more and get a taste for kind of who I am and what I do is on Instagram. So at Julie Savone, which of course will be linked up because my middle name is made up and it's weird. So you can just click the link. But go ahead and send me a message, or if you want to send me an email, Julie at Julie Savone. I'm always happy to hop on a call and just answer any questions that you have so that you can learn more about whether this might be a good fit for you if you're interested in this process. And if it's something you already know you are interested in, we can have a call about my microdosing collective, which is a beautiful community that pairs the tools with the microdosing, with the support and the community around this work. It's really my pride and joy. And I know that it's bridged all the gaps that I have seen to be missing in this space to do it in a really intentional, integrative, and sustainable way. And if it is something you're interested in and like more of a macro dose, I do offer retreats. So just go ahead and send me a message that says retreats and we can talk more about that as well.
Love. Yes. I want to send you a message for retreats. I love retreats. I think that doing things in person is the most connected way to do things when we can, because obviously we want to reach a broader audience. So it's hard to do it like that all the time, but retreats are great options, especially if you're really wanting to get some leaps and bounds in a small amount of time.
Yeah, it's so powerful. I love meeting people in real life. I love having conversations. Like you could never bug me with this stuff. So if you have any question at all, please send me a message. It lights up my entire heart to talk about the beauty of this medicine.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much. Well, thank you for educating us today on this, and not even just educating, but also just like enlightening us with, I just understand that I believe this in all areas, but especially in this area, some of these areas that are more controversial and just popping up that are brand new. There is no stupid question. People just need to be more open to being vulnerable in a space and just saying, I don't understand. Please explain. How can this help me? What would this benefit me? Or how would I even be interested in that? So many people are like, this isn't my thing. I'm like, well, you don't know if it's your thing until you ask questions and find out if it is your thing. So be curious. That is, I think, the most important thing. And be open-minded when people do give you, especially in a way that Julie's doing it, that is so intentional and supportive, in a community space. And there is a healing aspect behind it, which I think is the giant hug that the world needs right now. So
yes, 100%. No silly questions, no obvious questions. Thank you so much for having me on and for facilitating this conversation. I think it was beautiful. We talked about so many cool things too that were just like intertwined in all of it.
Yeah, well, that is kind of what it is. I think that's the thing is people assume it's going to be one thing and we're going to have this conversation. It's only going to be about this. And it's like, but that's the thing is that in health and wellness spaces, everything is interconnected. It is not one thing equals one thing ratio. It is, I relate it to my stepmom who is an acupuncturist, and she'll put needles in me where I'm like, I've got a headache, and she'll put it in my toe. And I'm like, what is happening? Like there's so many nerve endings and emotional pathways, neurological pathways and everything in our body that everything is interconnected. And so, yeah, just don't forget that. Like, it's not about one thing. This is a benefit that's not just going to help you with anxiety. It's going to help you with everything in your life, and all the things that you're trying to do. So thank you, Julie, so much. Like I said, I've been wanting to have this conversation with you for quite some time. And I knew, just like you said, surrendering to the right moment was going to bring about the best conversation, and that it did. It did not disappoint. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And if you are interested in working with Julie, all of her information is in the show notes, and we will see you in the next episode.
Thank you so much for listening to the Recovering Perfectionist Podcast. I'm Christine, and if this episode resonated with you or spoke to you in any way, please feel free to share. I absolutely love hearing from you guys and your thoughts about the topics based on your experiences. And also, if there's anything you want me to talk about, just screenshot this episode and share it on social media with your comments. Your feedback really helps me to curate episodes that best serve you. If you have time, I would greatly appreciate if you could leave a review wherever you're listening to this episode, whether on Apple or Spotify or any other platform. I'm wishing you a blessed week ahead, and remember, perfection doesn't exist. Take messy action. Healthy habits keep us balanced, and you are enough.